In physics we'll be dealing a lot with right angled triangles. Hopefully we all remember from GCSE maths that the longest side is called the hypotenuse. Just write hip for short. We have names for the other two sides as well, but the names we give them depend on which angle we're thinking of. So if we're concentrating on this angle here, I'd better give it a name, so I'll call it theta, which is the name we most often give to angles. So if we're thinking about the angle marked theta, this side is the opposite side. And the side that's next to the angle theta is the adjacent side. And we need to remember the definitions that we learnt at GCSE, that sine of theta means the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. The cosine of theta is the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse. And the third relationship is that the tangent of theta is equal to opposite divided by adjacent. In physics we won't use tangent anywhere near as much as the other two, but I've included it here because a lot of people have a way of remembering the relationships that relies on all three. And the word that lots of people learn to remember them is SOHCAHTOA. Where the SO means that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. The CA comes from cosine, is adjacent over hypotenuse. And the TOA comes from tangent, is opposite over adjacent. If learning SOHCAHTOA helps you remember the relationships, then learn it. If it doesn't help you, forget the word and just learn the relationships. So here's an example where we're given the length of the hypotenuse and we're told what the angle is. And what we're asked to find is the length of the other two sides. This side I've labelled y, this side we've called x. So if we do the y first, so y of course is the opposite side to the angle that's given, 30 degrees, and x is the adjacent side to the angle that's being given. So if I want to find y, that's the opposite. We know the hypotenuse, so we're thinking opposite and hypotenuse, and opposite divided by hypotenuse is sine. So I'm going to write a little note to myself really. Sine of 30 degrees is equal to opposite over hypotenuse. Let's label that hypotenuse just to make it clear. And then I can look at the values. In this case, the opposite is the thing that we're looking for, y. We don't know its value yet, but we know that it's called y. And the hypotenuse is the side that's labelled. That's 80 millimetres. So sine of 30 must equal opposite over hypotenuse, which is y, divided by 80. So if I need to find y, well, if I can sort of cover up the bit in the middle, because that really wasn't part of the work and that was just a little note to myself, sine of 30 equals y divided by 80. So if I want to get y to be on its own in this equation, then if I multiply both sides by 80, I get the expression for y. So if I multiply the sine 30 by 80, I get 80 times sine of 30 degrees equals y. And then of course I take my calculator and into my calculator I put 80 times the sine of 30 degrees, which gives me an answer of 40. And when you've done a few of these with 30 degrees, it's a sign that you get to learn that the sine of 30 is 0.5. Therefore y equals 40. And then we remember that we're dealing with measurements, so we must have units, so it's millimetres. And then I can do a similar calculation to find x. Look at the triangle again. X is the side that's adjacent to 30 degrees. So we know the hypotenuse, we're trying to find x. So adjacent and hypotenuse, that must be cosine. So cosine of 30 degrees. And just to really help myself remember it, I'm going to write down with the words. Much better to write these little notes into yourself and get it right than to try and miss them out and get it wrong. So cosine 30 is adjacent over hypotenuse, which is equal to x, the thing that we don't know, we're trying to find, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 80. So cosine of 30 equals x divided by 80. Bit in the middle we can forget about there, cover that up. So if I want to find x, I have to multiply both sides of the equation by 80. So 80 times cosine 30 equals x. 80 times cosine 30 degrees equals x. So I take my calculator, 80 times cosine of 30 degrees, and it gives an answer of 69.282 and all that stuff, because I'm not going to bother with all those figures. I'm going to round that off and call it 69 millimetres. And that's how we do it.